like to introduce to you Mr. Kishore Singh. He is the curator of this beautiful show here. He is also heading the DAG, which is Delhi Art Gallery Modern, and he is a very well-known art critic and a journalist. He has been writing in various newspapers, his columns, and also on all kinds of subjects which he thinks are worthy of being written about. Just want to thank Kishore for bringing this beautiful show here, because we in Chandigarh are normally left out of the circuit in the whole country, and you have thought of it and you have reposed this faith in us, and I hope we have lived up to it. But as you know, Chandigarh has witnessed a whole lot of people visiting this particular show, which I in my kind of artistic career have never seen before. Students and teachers and art lovers coming from far-flung areas in like buses full of students and teachers and art lovers, and one after the other. So it has really, in fact, made the difference, and people have been educated, especially with the art walks which you organized, and you also organized one special session for children or students with special abilities, especially the blind children. And we have certain artworks with those tactile, art representations, displayed along with the artwork. With that, those who are not so kind of lucky to be able to see, so that they can feel the world of art, as an artist perceives through the touch.
Thank you, good evening and welcome. And thank you, Diwan. Diwan said some wonderful things at the start of this session. I do want to say that DAG has been delighted to collaborate with the Punjab Lalit Kala Academy. We've had a wonderful response to the show. We take our shows across India and often outside the country as well. But the kind of response we've received in Chandigarh has really been a bit of an eye-opener. It was not something we were expecting, and I do know that it is Diwan personally who's kind of driven and pushed and brought people in, brought students in, brought groups in, asking them to come look at the works, see these very, very interesting facets of 20th century Indian art. So thank you, Diwan. Thank you for making it possible, and thank you for making it such a success. I am going to talk, and fairly succinctly, on how people collect, how people invest, what the whole idea is. Why does art interest people? Why is it fascinating for so many of us? What is it that makes an art collector? If you have 8 paintings in your house, are you an art collector? You brought art, you put it up, you enjoy art, but are you necessarily a collector? You have 50 saris at home, would you say you're a sari collector? There are certain dimensions and dynamics that go into building a collection, into evaluating a collection, and to putting a value to art, into understanding what makes a work of art so special, and which is what drives people, that great degree of passion that is essential to building a collection. 5,000 years ago, somebody made this tiny little piece of bronze sculpture, the Mohenjo-daro dancing girl at the National Gallery of Modern Art in Delhi. We don't know whether this is a work of art as a sculpture or a child's toy, something left behind, something found in the digs, in the archaeological diggings that happened. But it tells us about, it gives us some clues into what life was like over there. It gives us an idea of perhaps the role of women. Here is a woman who's extremely confident. She's not timid. Her body language is very strong. You can see the jewelry she wears. As a piece of work that has traveled that distance to be with us today, that image has been appropriated by many of us, by us who write or talk about art, by feminists who put it on the covers of their books, by economists, by other people, etc. So the reason I'm pointing it out is, Art does not belong to any one specific category of people. Art is a part of our heritage, of our legacy. It's something that we leave behind. It is never owned by an individual. It is owned by people, humans, countries, nations. So, how would you put a value to something like this? Something that has traveled this distance, tells these amazing stories. What is it that people mostly purchase? Gold, property. They go on wonderful holidays, often several times a year. The Indian wedding is a thing of great joy, etc. These are our usual spends. But what is it that drives a collector apart from just spending? Because just spending money and acquiring a signature is not a sign of a collector. A work of art needs to have a quality of uniqueness, of rarity, historicity. Uniqueness, I think Yamini talked about, for example, mediums providing one element of uniqueness. But any work of art is unique. An artist does not work to create 20 works that are similar, or 200 or 2,000. Each one has its own quality, its own rarity, its own importance. And when you own a work by Sousa, for instance, that leads to the conversations that are important, because you're going to say, I love my Sousa. Yeah, I've also got a Sousa. No, my Sousa is better, etc., etc. So imagine sitting on an evening, having a conversation, enjoying it. We enjoy literature, we enjoy art, but it's also a shared experience. Let's go to any house which has 2 paintings, you will immediately talk about those works of art, those artists, because there's something that compels us to talk about art. It pulls us, it draws us. Rarity, if an artist has done only an X number of works in his or her lifetime. Gaitonde, India's most expensive artist, for example, is known to have only painted 200 canvases. Obviously, that quality of rarity means that a certain value comes up. So there's a desirability to want to own a slice of something that not everyone will have access to. Historicity, if an artist has painted something that is very specific, if Krishan Khanna paints Gandhiji's death, or people reading about Gandhiji's death, and this group of people reading a newspaper, etc., and it's exhibited in an exhibition and wins a prize, it creates a certain kind of history that makes the work important. Winning a national award makes the work important. Being owned by a important institution or a museum makes the work important. That adds to the history of the work of art and adds value. Longevity in terms of how a work travels over a period of time, which means that it's not limited to a trend of the moment. If I paint today, if I paint flowers today and tomorrow people don't respond to it, people say, it was a fad then, etc., then it hasn't traveled well. It's not a classical piece. It will not survive the next 200, 400, 5,000 years the way the Dancing Girl of Mohenjo-daro did. So that aspect of surviving time, superseding time, is also something that creates a sense of value. Legacy and heritage, we've all talked about. Identity, I mean specifically the artist and what the artist is communicating in a style, in a manner, and over a range of subjects that are important. So we know Hussein painted horses, for example. That association itself becomes important. I'll just tell you how things are valued. A Chinese Kunlong was 345 crores. Somebody paid for a very fragile piece of China. A cabinet, 600 years old, 23 crores. A manuscript, the original manuscript of the Book of Mormon, 22.6 crores. Imagine someone finding the original manuscript penned of the Ramayana. How would you ascribe a value to it? That is what I'm talking about. The whole idea of quality, rarity, historicity. The most expensive painting, photograph so far, 27 crores. We take photographs with a mobile phone. The most expensive diamond, which has been sold. We can't ascribe a value to the Kohinoor. We don't know what it'll fetch should it ever come into the market, or the Hope diamond. But this pink star was auctioned 3 years back for 460 crores. A very rare Ferrari, the 250 GTO, only one of its kind. That value. I don't like automobiles very much. Something even like this, the dress that Marilyn Monroe wore to sing to President Kennedy, "Happy birthday, Mr. President," sold for 31 crores. Here, the aspect of celebrity becomes an important part of how values are established. Somebody wants to own a part of that celebrityness rather than the quality of the work itself. The most expensive yacht that has been, again, auctioned. Liu Yukan. Many of you would not have heard of this man. A Chinese collector, was a taxi driver who made his money investing in stocks, in pharmaceuticals, and in real estate. Went on to become one of China's top billionaires, but unlike many of them, China actually has one of the largest number of billionaires now buying art. But unlike a lot of them who did not come from the same humble origins that he did, he started collecting a great and a motley collection of art objects. He bought a bowl, a tea bowl or a soup bowl, 500 years old, for which he paid 36.3 million. A tanka for 45 million. Song, that should be Songirawas, for 14.7 million. And I'll tell you how much he bought the Modigliani for in just a bit. Eccentric, but buying into his own legacy, a lot of Chinese art, a lot of Chinese antiquities. He's often photographed drinking tea out of that little bowl that he bought, or wearing a robe that might have been worn by some emperor. He's created a massive museum of his collection in an astounding building in Shanghai, which is one of the highlights for visitors who now travel to Shanghai. But another interesting thing, and this is something that occurs with a lot of collectors as well, is that he started collecting international art, Western art, and that starts happening with people who build collections and have sufficient confidence to rise above national traits. Typically, who buys Indian art? Indians buy our art. Non-resident Indians in particular look towards buying it because you're reclaiming your roots, your nationality, your identity. It gives you a sense of purpose, a focus. You're proud to tell people, these are people, these are my artists, this is what they've done, etc. Those stories become more interesting if you're in UK or USA or elsewhere in Europe somewhere. It's like taking a bit of India and bringing it to the world and feeling proud of it. But what happens next is when they have enough confidence in themselves, they start buying art that does not need to be constrained by national identities. So then you will buy a Picasso. Then you will buy a Gauguin, then you'll look at other artists, etc., because it doesn't matter. The nationality doesn't matter, the geography doesn't matter. What matters is the art itself. It rises above such narrow barriers, and with this Chinese collector, we saw that happen as well. Another collector that I'd like to talk about, Peggy Guggenheim. Peggy Guggenheim, as we know, was a member of the very influential Guggenheim family, built this great collection of art that she has put into a museum in Venice. And the Guggenheim Museum in New York is not only an iconic building, it puts together some of the most iconic exhibitions. India's own V.S. Gaitonde has been shown over there. So the interesting thing, particularly in America, was that a lot of the wealthy started buying art, but they wanted to also share it with the nations. They didn't want to keep it to themselves. Collectors come in many, or are of many kinds and come in many colors, etc. Some will buy works of art that they will keep in their basements and won't let even their closest family or friends share them. They will spend hours and hours sitting on a chair just looking at a piece of work, not sharing it with anyone else. There are many others like Peggy Guggenheim whose acts of philanthropy are the reason why America's museums are so rich in terms of the art that has been bequeathed to them, the collections that have been given to them, whether on temporary loan or by the wings that have been added to the museums, or the money that has been given to the museums, etc., because that act of enjoying art as a public activity has been very, very important to them. And that is why Peggy Guggenheim becomes important. But there are literally thousands and thousands of people in America who've done this. A lot of people in Europe who've bequeathed museums, and their collections have become part of foundations or trusts that therefore run them as museums. That, of course, is the Guggenheim in New York. It's a kind of oval cylindrical building, so you walk up a ramp or you walk down that ramp in a circular manner rather than stairs or taking lifts. Her equivalent, I think it's important to talk about what we've done in India. We have a huge distance to travel. Despite our very long history, there have been people who've collected art earlier. The Tatars have collected, the Birlas have collected, etc. There's been a history of collecting, but on this level and scale, and once again to show it in a public building as a private museum is something that we have not seen before in this country. So therefore the Kiran Nadar Museum becomes a very important part of what is beginning to happen. Over here, that is Kiran Nadar on the left. The museum is temporarily housed in a mall, but it's looking for space and will eventually occupy its own independent space somewhere in central Delhi, or at least that is the intention. Those are works from the museum collection. Ramachandra on the left, that's a work by Subodh Gupta that you see on the right, his LOC, atomic explosion of steel utensils. So I'm going to come back to the whole idea of values again being ascribed to works of art, because almost inevitably people who do not follow art are most seduced by the idea that it has a value that is so high. How can something which is a piece of cloth with a little paint on it and a wooden frame command values that are phenomenal? And how are those values created? The reasons I've already shared, a sense of the artist, its rarity, historicity, etc., etc. But again, just look at some of these works. This is a painting by Leonardo da Vinci that is coming up for auction. It is to be auctioned, I think, next month or this month? Next month, in November. A Da Vinci. Imagine how rare that is. All the Da Vincis are in museums, or they're in permanent collections, very few rare permanent collections, or they're in churches, public buildings. They cannot be taken out of there. There have been very, very, very few that have been in private hands. So when this work comes up for auction, you can understand the kind of bidding frenzy this is going to create. The Renaissance artists were known for the kind of work that they created and gave to the world. We traveled to Italy to see so much of what they've contributed by way of literature, architecture, and art. Here's a chance to own a slice of that very important aspect of history. So its estimated value, 650 crores. Punters are saying it's going to go far beyond that, because for people who want to own a work by Da Vinci, maybe in their lifetimes there will not be another opportunity like this. Museums would want to acquire it, but do museums have those kind of budgets? Even if they stretch themselves, possibly not. But it is entirely possible that a collector who is also a philanthropist will actually buy it or bequeath it to a museum so more people can share in it. It depends entirely on the personality of the eventual winning bidder. But this, just an interesting kind of correlation to that figure that we have of 650 crores, which is its estimated value. And then you have the Mona Lisa, which was, kind of assessed at the same value in 1962, and which now has a notional escalated value of 5,100 crores. It can only be a notional value. We don't see it ever coming out, or being sold, auctioned, whatever, etc. Okay, Maezawa, a Japanese collector, a young Japanese collector, has come into focus over the last 2 years because he started acquiring works by Michel Basquiat. Basquiat was an American artist of color who died very young. His works were not works of great beauty, as you will see. Look at this work and try and guess its value now. Again, works are very rare because Basquiat died very early. So there are very few works available in the market, and they've been escalating in value. 715 crores. The earlier work, incidentally bought by the same Japanese collector, was sold for 370 crores. So clearly there was a bidding war that happened that led to the next one going up in value to 715 crores. That's the collector with the work. Giacometti, an amazing sculptor. The world's highest values are recorded by this sculptor, 912 crores. We estimate that the annual turnover of art in India is anywhere between 1,000 and 1,200 crores. One work of sculpture equals almost the entire size of the Indian art market. I'm now just going to take you through some values to try and understand the kind of estimates and actual sale values that have been achieved by works of art. These are some of the most expensive works of art in the world. I think the top 10 are certainly included here. So you have a William de Kooning, which sold for 194 crores just 2 years ago. Cézanne, for many years, held the record. This was not sold at an auction. This was a private sale. So the figure is always speculated. That was the figure that was realized for the painting. 1720 crores. I don't even know how many zeros that is. Gauguin, part of his Tahitian series, when this whole idea of bringing in a primitive element into the art-making practice was brought in as an aspect of modernism, very important at the turn of the century. 1,370 crores. Jackson Pollock. He didn't give numbers, he didn't give names or titles to his paintings. They were always given number codes, etc. 1,300 crores. Aspects of pouring paint, dripping paint onto canvas. Went on to create history for the kind of works that he's created. Also innovation in your style or experimentation. Mark Rothko, who many abstract artists, particularly from India, have ascribed to in terms of the quality that he brought into his art-making practice, often using flat colors, became known as a color field painter, and that value is 1,215 crores. And then, because for some reason we seem to get only the modernists who go in this category, we do have these two Rembrandts. These are pendant portraits, small in size, but they commanded over 1,100 crores when they were auctioned. And Picasso's extremely important work, again for a long while held the record value for the top-selling artist in the world, 1,178 crores, bringing in elements of his Cubist style. It was here that he'd begun introducing the process of Cubism to Western modernism. And a Chinese friend who bought this work by Modigliani after he'd started and perhaps fatigued of collecting works of Chinese origin or antiquities, started acquiring works of Western masters. So this nude was purchased by him for over 1,100 crores. The next is again a Pollock, 1,000-something crores, and a Liechtenstein, creating a new kind of art-making style for contemporary artists, 1,000 crores plus. So why does art have a price? All objects have a price. We put a value to something, something that has desirability, etc., etc. Values keep increasing because of that. Ownership creates values, etc. But the essential things, human beings like to surround themselves by beauty. Beauty means that you start looking at things. Architecture is a very important aspect of that. And art, to furnish your architecture and express your living style, leads to that first desire to acquire and surround yourselves with beauty. It's a human instinct. But art, like literature, like all great things, etc., is also a mirror to its times. An artist, if you paint in the style of Rembrandt today, it has no value. A Da Vinci work, look-alike by an artist today, has no value. That was what was relevant then. That was the style that was being introduced by artists at that point in time. What artists are working in now has relevance to us today, which is why we often see that in discussions, etc., when we are talking to and looking at younger generations are less, let's say, attracted to works by the modernists, by R. Hussains and Razas and D'Souza's. They tend to look at their peers, the contemporaries, the Subodh Guptas, Jagannath Pandas, the Jitesh Kalats, because there's a response that they're getting. It's of their time somewhere. So we read literature, we see cinema, we wear fashion which is of our time. We can't really go back to wearing clothes from the 60s and 70s. I promise you, you'll throw me out of this room. Art is desirable. It has a context to the times we live in, but it is, as I mentioned, also something that chronicles that time but moves on and has a history and a life far beyond that time. It has the ability to survive time. Why do we go and look at the temples of Khajuraho? That great beauty. The frescoes of Ajanta and Ellora. Why do we turn to them? Why? I mean, the same thing can be put up today. We can turn it into a digital image and surround these walls, etc. It is simply not the same thing. Seeing that work in original, in the place that it was created, in the context of that time is what makes it important, but that ability to transcend that time is what makes it a great work of art. And I think that is one of the most important things that we look at when we study art. Is it art for just now, or does it have the possibility of engaging generations that will follow? Before you start looking inwards, you start discovering yourself and start saying, this is what I like, this is what I'm responding to, this is what I'm confident about responding to. I like it for such and such reason, or I don't like it for such and such reason. This is how I want to build a focus to my collection. So therefore the artist sometimes becomes important as a first step to collecting. Also, art is a differentiator. it's a very important aspect of who we are somewhere. We try and dress in a way that is appealing. We don't dress for ourselves, we dress to impress the person opposite. What does art do? You can all buy the same Pajeros. We all know the value. It's the same car, it has the same technology, there will be no difference in it. We can go to the same architect, he'll build us great houses, etc. We'll go to Sabyasachi Mukherjee for wedding saris, etc., etc. There is a sameness to it. You're going for the brand, you're going for the value, you're going for the quality. But what does art do? Each work of art is unique. Each one is different. The artist has lived with each brush stroke. There is a part of the soul of the artist in everything that has been created. You are acquiring a part of that artist's soul, that breath that comes with that work of art, and yet each one is also unique by itself. Each one has its own story. Each one has been created for that reason. And perhaps that reason is the one that helps us engage in the conversations that we speak about. Hussain Saab made hundreds of canvases with horses in them. But I can bet you will never find any collector who will turn around and say, your horses are better than mine. Your pride in your ownership, your pride in engaging in those conversations, in wanting to be a part of something unique is why art establishes those differentiators that are very exciting, and it creates those conversations. Reasons for art's premium value, of course, is the rarity of the works, the very high quality of the works, the provenance of a work, the history of a work, who's owned a work. If a work that has been owned by Peggy Guggenheim comes into the market, that is a brand that is amazing. Immediately, that someone with an eye that was so excellent has contributed to the provenance of a work of art makes that history very, very exciting. So that again creates value for a work. Have great collectors been acquiring an artist's works? Have museums, institutions been buying that artist's works? If yes, you know that those values will strengthen and harden. And as a collector, that is what you're constantly looking for. I like the work, but who else is looking at that work? Who else is interested in acquiring these works? Does the artist have stayability? If the artist is an alcoholic, you're in trouble, because he could lose control, she could lose control, they could disappear, they could, things could happen, etc., that mars their career and their prospects, etc. So you also study an artist's journey. How have they been progressing? How is their work been changing? Have you been a part of that journey with them? Are you talking to the artist? Isn't that part of the interest as a collector? Don't we want to know more about them, from them? Why should you always listen to somebody, third person, second person, etc.? Isn't the pleasure in sharing and understanding directly from the artist, if possible? That makes collecting a great a joy. And then, of course, every artist creates works that may be phenomenal, but there will always be a percentage of them that are of exceptional quality somewhere. If an artist has painted 10,000 works in his lifetime, all 10,000 will not be, they may be good works, they may be great works, but they cannot evenly be all excellent works. We estimate that 10% of an artist's output is works of very high, exceptional quality. As a collector, you're looking for those exceptional stories, those exceptional works, those wonderful adventures in trying to get those works, in trying to make sure that a competitor doesn't get them, another peer doesn't get them, in making sure that, and therefore, the interesting aspects it throws up. Do you look at a work by an artist and say, this appeals to me, I want this work? Or do I go to the artist and say, make me something like this, I enjoy the work? Because when a work is being commissioned, you don't know what you're going to receive. You don't know what you're going to get back somewhere. So should you follow what you're seeing? Should you try and build? What kind of a patron are you going to be? Again, who's collecting? I've already said this. Understanding what critics are saying, what art writers are saying, what institutions are writing about them. Are they being exhibited by other museums? Have works been invited to a biennale? Has the artist been shown at a biennale somewhere? Are relationships being built so that an artist from India is being shown with an artist from Austria, for example? Are a contemporary artist's works being related to a Nandlal Bose or a Rabindranath Tagore? Are they being shown together? What is the kind of marriage or relationship building that is happening? These create value, and collectors start looking at aspects such as this. Who's promoting an artist? Is it a gallery? Is the gallery strong? Does it have muscle power? Does it have funding power? Does it have staying power? Will it give them books? Will it give them films? Will it give them exposure? Will it create value for the artists somewhere? Very important to understand. I'm not saying go only with the large galleries or go only with the small galleries or go only with those who work very intimately, but these are questions that we have to ask ourselves. How do we look at and understand the creation of value for an artist and for a work of art? Museum collections, typically a work that goes to the National Gallery of Modern Art is to be respected, that artist is to be respected, etc., etc. But we also have others, private institutions, international museums, international collectives, etc. So we need to start understanding where an artist is being shown, represented, what awards is the artist winning or getting, what talks is the artist being invited to, what platforms is the artist sharing, and who is he sharing those platforms with. I think we need to now look at some of our own works of art, therefore. Amrita Shergill died when she was 28 years old, did very, very few works, a few hundred works in her entire lifetime. Again, works are very hard to get. Most works are either in museums or in permanent collections, etc. Very few works have come out. A few of them have appeared in auctions, and therefore the highest value created for a self-portrait is for the painting on the left. I'd just like to ask a question. Why do you think the Sousa is the most expensive Sousa ever sold in this country? Just study the painting and study the details of the painting, and I'll come back to it in just a moment. This is what Sousa worked on. He painted nudes. He painted heads and figures, often associated with the church as well. Painted still lifes, painted landscapes. So when he creates a painting such as this, in which all the elements are there, you have the still life, you have the landscape, you have the priest, the head associated with the church, and you have a nude. You're actually combining all the elements that the artist was known for, and he did not do this very often. It makes the work exceptionally rare. It's also from a very good period, the early 60s, when he was painting some of his best works, when his works were being acquired by a collector called Harold Kovner, an American, who commissioned him. So while he was living in London, he was painting and supplying to Kovner, etc. So there's impeccable provenance. It's the artist's best period. He combines and brings in all elements that he's known for into a painting. Painting itself is very, very impressive. So that creates value, history, rarity, the collector history as well somewhere, all the elements that create the value that this work fetched. The interesting thing is that this painting was sold on eBay for a few $100s. It was actually first sold on eBay. Then it was auctioned at Christie's, where the work was acquired by Tina Ambani. The family was unhappy with the purchase because of the nude, so the work was never in fact brought into the country. It remained in America, in New York, where it was commissioned, and the family loaned it to the Peabody Essex Museum, where it stayed on display till it went back on auction perhaps 4 years later, created another record for the artist, and was repurchased by the Kiran Nather Museum of Art. India's most expensive artist. Gaitonde, again, was shown at the Guggenheim, which of course created a great demand for his works internationally. He was a Rockefeller grantee, traveled there in 1965. His work was acquired by John D. Rockefeller at that point in time. This particular work, in fact, was part of the Rockefeller collection before it was consigned to Christie's at an auction. By this time, Gaitonde was beginning to be recognized for the quality of his works around the world. Once again, going back to what Yamini was talking about in terms of the kind of mediums that artists, etc., use, he used paint, a roller, by which he painted the canvases, but then he would strip the paint off and do the next coating with a roller. And he used this process several times. So he would sometimes paint and strip, paint and strip, paint and strip 20, 30 times, etc. As a result of which, when you stand in front of a Gaitonde painting, when you look at it like this, you say, why should I pay anywhere close to this kind of value for something like this? It's partly the process and partly understanding when you're standing in front of the work that while there are almost no forms that we can attribute and say, oh, this looks like a tree or a house or a person, etc., it's almost formless in that sense, non-representational as he chose to call it. You have a great sense of depth. Stand in front of a Gaitonde and you feel you're being pulled into the painting. It's an amazing quality that the artist created, and the fact that there are such few canvases has made his works very desirable. Fortunately, many of his works were in private hands. Many of his works have continued to come for auction, and despite the fact that they're continuing to come for auction, they continue to command very high prices because collectors know that if there is a finite number of these canvases, you won't have any a few years down the line. So perhaps even at these high values, it's worth bringing them in now before values start adding zeros to some of the figures. That painting sold for 29.2 crores, if I didn't have the price, I'm sorry. This Gaitonde on the left sold recently and created a record for a painting sold by an Indian auction house in India. It sold for 19 point something crores, and the one on the right sold for 18 crores. Raza Saab, very interesting artist who lived and worked out of France for 60 years before returning in the last few years of his life to live in Delhi. And we know that his art has two major kind of differences. He painted in the Western European style of creating abstract landscapes in the early 30 years of his career in France, and then on a home visits started painting what came to be known as the Bindu, the Mandala, the Germination, etc. series, works that were inspired very strongly by Hindu philosophy, Indian philosophy, etc., and based on the whole idea or geometry of Tantra. This work used to have the highest value till La Terre sold for 18 crores. So that is Raza's high point. Tayyab Mehta, again an artist who has finite number of works because he had this propensity to keep withdrawing his works even after he'd sold them, going into his buyers' homes or gallerists' homes and taking away works, saying he wanted to do something to it and then not returning it and maybe giving them a separate painting or whatever, because if he was unhappy with the kind of work that he had done, he did not want it to go out, and he chose to destroy a lot of his canvases instead of letting them sell, became the first Indian artist who commanded a price of over $1 million, etc. Of course, now values have gone up to almost 20 crores and counting. His work, often using 3 primary colors, 2 primary colors, 4 primary colors, etc., very flat planes, depicts a struggle between 2 opposing senses of power. He does not talk about good and evil, the entire story being that the victor always tells the story, so the vanquished will always be the evil one. So therefore, he has 2 opposing forces that come in, very often from Hindu mythology, this whole thing of Kali and Mahishasur in this case being a very interesting point. Whole story very often of trust bulls. He often saw, particularly in Bombay and in Calcutta on visits to butcheries, etc., these buffaloes tied up, trussed and thrown on their back, etc., on their way to the abattoir. So he often painted these falling figures, trussed bulls. Hussain, who for many, many years was the face of Indian modernism, an extremely prolific artist. So there are estimates that he could have painted 30,000 works, 40,000 works, etc., which makes it amazing, on a par with perhaps Sousa in India and Picasso in the West in terms of the sheer output of work that he did. Also very competitive. So if he saw, for example, that an Tayyab Mehta was getting a value that was more than his, what he would do was he would organize a sale of his works with a deliberate price point that was kept higher, perhaps by giving the money himself to the alleged buyer, so that his values were sustained at the highest price point above those of his peers, etc. For a few years, his value did slow down a little because we saw, when he was in exile, etc., etc., that there were a lot of people who were unhappy with the kind of discussion or conversations that were happening around Hussain Saab. But the interesting thing is that serious collectors were still acquiring his works, but they chose to keep it quiet. They didn't want it broadcast, etc. But Hussain's works are now back in the market. They command very steep prices. Of course, known for his horses, as we all know, but several series of his are extremely interesting and important. Arpita Singh, I've just included her here because in this entire list that we've had, other than Amrita Shergill, we really didn't have an artist with an established high price point, etc. This is, for a woman artist, the highest price point other than that achieved by Amrita Shergill. So how do you collect? How do you build a collection? How do you invest, for that matter? What do you look at? Investors, of course, follow the money and see the possibility. There are analysts who study the works. They see auction prices, etc., etc., create a value chart, create pie charts, graphs, etc., and analyze and decide what they want to buy and what they will want to hope to get in return, etc. Collectors may be price sensitive. Not everyone can spend a lot of money. You can be a collector at very low price points as well. You start looking at emerging artists, you start buying younger artists, you start buying prints of artists. There are ways of collecting where you don't have to have the kind of money that is required for those exceptional values that we've talked about somewhere. How do you spread a collection? Do you just buy something because of a gut reaction? I like this, I like this, I like this. Or do you study works by an artist? Do you focus on something? I am only going to buy works on paper, maybe only watercolors. My interest may be still lifes or landscapes. I'll buy only landscape paintings, no figures for me. I might choose to buy only works painted by an artist in 1980 because my year of birth was 1980. That becomes my way of focusing on something. There are ways of looking at. There is no, you can't ascribe a quality or a value to collecting through a focus. That focus needs to be defined by you yourselves. Do I buy only one artist? Do I nurture and mentor an artist? Do I promote, therefore, the career of that artist in the way that I can, going and speaking at various forums, etc., about that one artist, or about 3 artists, for example, somewhere? It's entirely, I mean, the realms of possibility are amazing. I could collect only women artists if I so choose. Or do I buy only works of the Bengal school, or works painted by the progressive artists, or works, abstract works from the 60s, maybe? It's a humongous choice out there. Or you say, I want a representation of all kinds of art, all kinds of periods, all kinds of histories, all kinds of genres, etc. So I want to collect in a linear manner, build a historical narrative, plug in gaps, etc. So when I look at my works of art, I get a sense of the history of Indian art from a certain period to a certain period somewhere. So when you start collecting, when you start looking at works of art, when you've understood why you want to collect, how you want to collect, etc., when you've talked to a large number of people, there are still some things that you need to do. You need to research the background for that work of art. Where is it coming from? Who has offered it? What history has it had? Has the artist created more than one work in that series? Is it a unique work? Were they done for a special commission of some kind? Who owned the work previously? Was it one owner, 3 owners, 8 owners? Why is it sold so little or so many times, etc.? So building and finding out something about that work of art becomes not only important because you're putting value into that work of art, it's also important because you're getting involved in something that you enjoy. That's part of the passion, that's part of the fun of collecting, knowing the histories of the artists, the artworks, the ownerships, the backgrounds, etc. Very important to know some background of the person you're buying it from. Person to be trusted, gallery to be trusted, someone from the field of art, someone unknown, etc., etc. Because when you're putting out a certain value, and it doesn't matter whether it's 50,000, 5 lakhs, or 5 crores, you do want to know the bona fides of the person you're buying from. You want to establish the authenticity of the work. We all know that there are many fakes by artists. As soon as value goes up for a Manjeet Bawa, there are more fakes that come in the market. We know there are more fakes by Jamini Roy in the market, despite the very large number of works that he created, because they're very easy to copy, etc. There are experts who will tell you whether a work is genuine or not genuine. So therefore, if you're getting a deal, if you're getting a good price, be very suspicious. Be very suspicious of buying from good friends. You could be picking up a lemon somewhere. Very, very important for you to know where you're getting and sourcing your work from. That provenance becomes the document which is not dissimilar to the documents that you have when you buy a property, for example. You do so much due diligence when you're buying a house or a piece of land. We need to do that same due diligence when we're buying a work of art. We need to establish the value. Look at auction results. It's the most obvious Googleable material available to all of us at any point in time. Yes, a work may have sold there for 50 lakhs, you may be getting it 5 lakhs, or you may be getting it for 3 crores. There is a difference in quality, there's a difference in the period, there's different elements that add value, but at least have a sense of understanding of that value before you make your offer, or before you agree to somebody's offer. And do not be fearful of making mistakes. We will make bad choices. We will buy poor quality works. It's a part of something that will stay with you for the rest of your life, etc. So figure out. There are collectors I know who bought works which really don't mark them out as serious collectors of any kind, etc. They don't do them credit, but they keep their works and they keep them in a prominent place to remind themselves of the mistakes they've made in the beginning of their collecting careers. There are others who say, made a mistake, it was a bad choice, I'm happy to sell it, I'm happy to put it away, I'm happy to hide it, I don't want to remind myself of the mistakes I've made, I want to go on somewhere. Doesn't matter who or what you want to do, but don't be afraid of making mistakes. Akbar Padamsee's Greek landscape, a great work of art. So it was painted in 1959 by the artist. He painted 3 of these large panoramic works, Greek landscape, grey nude, and one more work that was bought by Hussain Saab and has somewhere disappeared. No one knows where the third work is. It was put up in Gallery 59 by Bal Chabra. It was acquired by Krishan Khanna in 1960. It remained over Krishan Khanna's dining table in all the homes that he lived in as he was traveling from 1960 onwards, whether it was Allahabad or Chennai or Bombay or New Delhi or more recently in Gurgaon. It was sold recently. He bought it for 5,000 rupees in 1960. Can you guess its value now? You've had good lessons in prices.
Over 20 crore? 18?
Very good. Excellent estimates. It's been acquired by a collector, an Indian collector, an NRI, based out of New York. So, ladies and gentlemen, what value would you ascribe to that now? Truly priceless. So, thank you.